Recording in progress.
Which AP is?
I just called them. I just told them.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Board of Retirement for Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. This meeting is being held virtually and in person, so I will do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Mr. Green?
Present.
Mr. Razzo?
Present.
Mr. Harris?
Present.
Ms. Fessler?
Present.
Mr. Kehoe?
Present.
Mr. Rue?
Present.
Mr. Moore?
Present.
Ms. Langton?
Present.
Ms. Ginsburg? Mr. Oakham?
Present.
Chair Robbins?
Present.
Staff participating in the meeting include Deputy CEO Louis Lugo, Assistant Executive Officers JJ Popowich and Laura Guglielmo, Deputy CIO Jude Perez, Chief Counsel Stephen Rice, Senior Staff Counsel Allison Barrett, Frank Boyd, and Jean Kim, Legislative Affairs Officer Barry Liu, LACERA's Medical Advisor Dr. Glenn Arisman. Staff and managers participating today include Carly Natoya, Kathy Delino, Chat Aronde, Ricky Contreras, Elsie Gutierrez, Ted Granger, Cassandra Smith, Louis Gittins, Vincent Lin, Tamara Caldwell, Tatiana Bayer, and Zach Meth. Trustees, please use the raise your hand Zoom option to be placed in the queue. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mics until you are ready to speak. And now we may proceed with the agenda.
Thank you very much. Item number 2 is the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Harris, would you like to do the honor?
Please join with me in the sign of the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks very much. Item 3, you want to?
Sure. No requests have been made for AB 2449. On to your approval.
Yeah. A little housekeeping before we start the meeting today. If you want to talk, push the button. Because we had people walking all over each other at the last board meeting and I can't keep track of who's who. So be sure you just raise your little hand thing and I can see on here, and that way we're not stepping on each other. Thank you very much. Approval of the minutes. Need a motion to approve the minutes of March 5th.
So moved. Second.
Any changes? Court you vote.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Razzo?
Aye.
Ms. Fessler?
Aye.
Mr. Kehoe? Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Ms. Langton?
Yes.
Ms. Ginsburg?
Yes.
Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
The motion, Chair Robbins?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Next item is item 5, public comment. We do not have any requests from the public to address the board, and I do not see anyone present who would like to address the board either. So we're now on item 6, executive update. Item A, LACERA All-Star, JJ.
Thank you very much, Chair. And good morning, trustees. Each month, we take a moment to recognize the LACERA staff who have been nominated by their fellow staff members for going above and beyond the call of duty to help members or each other. This month, we recognize Luis Alvarez, Julia Ray, Melissa Mook, and Selassie Burke. And our web watcher is our own Bonnie Malik. Thank you very much, everybody, for what you do. With that, with your permission, we'll move into the member spotlight. Okay, so our member spotlight. Sorry. So this is a way for LACERA to recognize the public servants that care for the constituents of LA County. And it's an opportunity for all of us to reflect on why we do what we do as we serve our members and empower them to enjoy a healthy and secure retirement. And this month, we recognize Deputy Sheriff Arlene Garcia. Arlene will be retiring in July after 3 decades of service. She has enjoyed her time dedicating to helping and protecting the constituents of LA County. She also does a lot of volunteer work that she enjoys doing, especially supporting children with disabilities. She plans on spending her time enjoying live music with her daughter. So I really am happy to see that because I go to a lot of concerts. So I hope she loves doing that. It's a great thing. So we really thank her for her 30 years of service, a well-earned retirement. Thank you very much.
Item C, Chief Executive Officer's Report, Lewis.
Okay, great. Good morning, Chair Robbins. Good morning, trustees. I know Bonnie's going to be putting up a slide here. I know we have this item highlighted within our Operations Oversight Committee, but wanted to highlight kind of our dashboard as it relates to our progress on our strategic planning efforts. If the board recalls, 2023, the Board of Retirement approved our strategic plan. In January of 2004, we kicked off our planning efforts. And just as we like to say, we want to make measured progress and incremental improvement. And I think I want to shout out to the team and those that are really leading the objectives around our 5 strategic pillars. I won't go into detail; they're highlighted on the slide, but it shows over the last year the progress that we've made, and it's intentional, making sure that we have work plans dedicated to these objectives, and it impacts every aspect of what we do, whether it's our members, our retirees, or internally in terms of our staff. So I wanted to just call this out and again highlight those individuals and the team collectively for making progress and their efforts on this, over and above the day-to-day work that we do at LACERA. So again, thank you to those that are leading the team, and we'll talk more about that at the Operations Oversight Committee. We've concluded March Madness. I know we haven't technically concluded because it's spilled over into April and May, but next month, Mr. Popowich will provide some details that relates to the trend analysis on our busiest month of elections, which is March. And so he'll be providing that next month. But again, want to send a special shout out to our Member Service Center, our benefits unit, for collectively getting through another busy season in March Madness. And I know, again, we spill that over into April and May. But thank you to Mr. Popowich and the collective member operations group on their efforts there. Board of Retirement Offsite, again, appreciate the trustees providing topics. We're putting the agenda together. We've reviewed a pre-agenda with board leadership, Mr. Robbins and Mr. Oakham. We hope to finalize the agenda hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and we'll share accordingly, and looking forward to a good active discussion come May 20th and 21st. Last week, Legislative Officer Barry Liu and I went up to the Capitol to visit the LA County Delegation, Assembly, and Senate, particularly the chair and vice chair of the Public Employment and Retirement Assembly Committee as it relates to their focus on public pensions. So we had a good visit with Assemblywoman McKinnon, and then also Vice Chair Mackey. We also met with the staff of the chair on the Senate side as it relates to labor and public employment. And again, these are annual visits for us. We had our legislative advocate, Naomi Padron, with us. And it's an opportunity, again, to share information as it relates to our particular legislative agenda as it relates to our members. Oftentimes in the Capitol, they talk about PERS and STIRS, so we want to make sure that they also understand that LACERA is highly visible, and especially the LA County delegation, that we have nearly 200,000 members supporting the day-to-day work throughout the county. Cassandra talked about the Staying Healthy Together event on April 29th. Communications, we'll be sending out a monthly outreach report. Appreciate Mr. Popowich and communications efforts on that, so that trustees, if you want to attend particular outreach efforts, I know some of the trustees provided feedback. So we're going to get out on a report to show the different outreach events we have throughout the county to support member education as well as any retiree education. So look for those, and certainly welcome your presence. I know JJ stated that on some of those, we want to make sure we know in advance so you're able to get into the particular venue. And then we have our JOGC meeting coming up April 23rd. The budget team, again, has been hard at work putting that together. We're finalizing that. And there'll be a couple of other items on the agenda. So look forward to the participation in our JOGC meeting April 23rd. And lastly, we have no hires in March, but we have 2 new hires in April. We have Gapur Pai, who's an information technology specialist that will be starting with the systems team. And then you'll get to meet the final information security team, which you'll meet that team in closed session during our committee meeting. And then we have Matthew Hamill, investment accountant in FASI. So welcome aboard to both Kapur and Matthew. And then with the Chair Robbins, in the good of the order, we'll highlight a few retirements that we have at LACERA. And with that, that concludes our report, and I'll stand for any questions.
Anyone have any questions for the CEO? I don't see any. I just have one quick question. Probably JJ can answer this one, but I noticed that the March 2024 and the March 2025 numbers were quite different. And we had a couple hundred more retirements March Madness a year ago than it looks like this year. Is that a reflection of anything significant, or are those numbers pretty up to date, accurate?
They're accurate as of the 15th of the month. So there's a few afterwards, but I haven't heard anything that says, well, this is causing a difference between the two, but we will look at that. And if there is anything that we've discovered, we'll report that out.
Well, I know from experience, those numbers can reflect one of two things usually. People that are ready to get out because things are not looking good, or 30 years ago or 25 years ago when they hired on, we went through a big influx of hiring. So maybe this is just not one of those years.
We'll look at that particularly. Yeah, it could be, it could be the economy and what's going on. So
Right.
a lot of uncertainty about where we're going.
Okay, thank you very much. We are now on item number 7, disability retirement applications on the consent agenda. The first batch will be case number 593 versus 621. These are all sheriff's cases, all for service-connected disability retirements. I need a motion.
So moved.
Mr. Keo?
Aye.
Mr. Razo?
Aye.
Ms. Fessler?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Ms. Langton? Ms. Ginsburg? Mr. Oakham? Chair Robbins?
I'm an aye.
The motion passes unanimously by all trustees present.
The second batch of cases 1929B through 1940B firefighter cases. I need a motion.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Razo?
Aye.
Ms. Fessler?
Aye.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Ms. Langton? Ms. Ginsburg? Mr. Oakham? Chair Robbins?
I'm an aye.
The motion passes unanimously by all trustees present.
The next cases are general member service-connected disabilities 2905C through 2917C. Need a motion.
Move.
I'll second it.
Mr. Green? Mr. Razo?
Aye.
Ms. Fessler?
Aye.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Ms. Langton? Ms. Ginsburg? Mr. Oakham? Chair Robbins?
I'm an aye.
The motion passes unanimously by all trustees present.
Consent agenda, item 8A, B, C, and D. I need a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Record the vote.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Razo?
Aye.
Ms. Fessler?
Aye.
Mr. Rue?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Ms. Langton? Ms. Ginsburg? Mr. Oakham? Chair Robbins?
I'm an aye.
The motion passes unanimously by all trustees present.
Item 9, excluded from consent items.
No items.
We do not have any. Non-consent items 10A. Here we go. 2024 actuarial evaluation of the LA County OPEB program. And we do have a presentation. Guaranteed to put non-accountants this week. Okay.
Good morning, Chair Robbins and Board of Retirement Trustees. My name is Ted Granger. I'm the Chief Financial Officer. Yes, it should be on. Yeah, I'll try to get a little closer. My name is Ted Granger. I'm the Chief Financial Officer here at LACERA. It's a pleasure to be here. With me today is Milliman, the consulting firm. These are LACERA's consulting actuary team from Boise, Idaho. As compared to our pension actuary team, we do have two separate teams from Milliman that work for us. We are here today to present the 2024 actuarial evaluation results for the OPEB program LACERA administers for LA County. To my left immediately is Janet Jennings. She's a long-term consultant on the project, on the account. Next to her is Robert Schmidt. He is also a long-term consultant on the account. And the newer person at the end is Ryan Cook. He joined LACERA, I want to say about a year and a half ago, and he's been a tremendous support for the team. One quick note, Janet Jennings is retiring from Milliman. So wanted to thank and recognize Janet for all of her work. She's been with us since inception. So that goes back to about 2006 when GASB 43 and 45 came out. And we first started preparing these OPEB reports for the board and for the county. So long time on the account. We really appreciate Janet's help and work. Janet gets down to the nuts and bolts, works with my team on the calendars and makes sure that we're on track with the reporting. And every once in a while sends us an email and says, hey, did you guys think about this? Oh yeah, we should think about that. So it's been a pleasure, Janet. Thank you.
Thank you.
So for this particular report, we're talking about the 2024 valuation cycle, the valuation report, not an experience study year. That happened last year for 2023. Next cycle will be for 2026. So no triennial study, no review of the assumptions this time, and no audits this time. The audits happen when the triennial work is done. One quick thing I'll highlight before I kick it over to Milliman is a couple of minor changes with the reporting timeline. We're here today at the board in April as compared to August. We normally come to the board about in August, so it takes us about 14 to 15 months to get the report done. In doing that, what we've done historically is we've included the next fiscal year healthcare premium renewals. So for this particular reporting cycle, we would have normally included the July 1, 2025 renewals. But instead, we didn't do that because we wanted to get the report out a little bit sooner. Those insurance renewals will go in the 25 report. Again, this is the 24 report. The other thing we did was we're not including as many late enrollees. Of course, this report is dated July 1, 2024. Milliman would include all of the enrollees up to the report date previously. Again, we took us about a year to get that report done, so we're including all of those enrollees. This time, we're going to include only a little bit shorter time period for the enrollees. The enrollees in the program the ones that we don't capture will be included in the next report. So we did discuss all these changes with the county. They were fine with the changes. We're basically including the 24 data in the 24 report, 25 data next year in the 25 report. So we've consolidated, get a little bit better timeline for the board, a little more consistent with how actual reports are done. Normally reports don't take 15 months, they take about 9 or 10 months. So a little more consistent with that. We're asking for approval of this report. Once that's done, the county will take this report and they will take a look at it. We also have Milliman prepare our GASB reports. This particular report is a valuation report. It's used to make funding decisions for the plan sponsor. That's LA County, and that's also LACERA. The next item on the agenda, we're going to talk about some funding decisions for LACERA that might be under consideration for the future. So that's the value of this report. Additionally, Milliman prepares GASB reports, which go to the county. Those reports are for the financial statements for the county. So it's important that we get this report completed. We take a look at the results, and then we also have Milliman prepare the reports that the employer needs for their financial statements. So with that, unless there's any questions for me on the timeline or any of the information I've discussed, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Milliman. They have some prepared slides that they'll walk through to discuss the results of the valuation report.
Robert?
Okay, thank you, Ted.
Sure.
So this is a highlight slide of what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk a little bit about the purpose and background of our valuation and refresh a little bit on some funding principles and basics. And then highlights of the results of the valuation, followed by more summary results and some historical information. Ryan will take us through that and some projections, and then questions and comments. But of course, we encourage any questions you might have along the way. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. All right, so starting with the purpose of our valuation, we want to determine with these actuarial valuations if the level of contributions is sufficient, and if it's not, we're going to tell you what is necessary to fund the trust and have sufficient assets to pay the benefits over the long term. To provide that information then to LACERA, the stakeholders, which we'll talk about who those are in a minute, and the Board of Retirement to assist you all in managing of the program. Moving to the next slide with some background. As you can see on the left side, where we are in the cycle, and Ted talked about this, so I'm not going to dwell on it a lot, but this is for the 2024 valuation. And as Ted mentioned, we're on a shorter time frame than we used to be. Used to be we'd come here in August, and now we're coming in April instead. But the stakeholders, as we refer to them, are on the right. So we have the agents, the participating employers of the county, which is the largest, and then Superior Court, LACERA, and then there's 4 smaller outside districts that are also part of this. The first 3 agents are pre-funding the benefits through a LACERA pre-funding program. The outside districts are either not pre-funding or pre-funding through a separate program. And then we've got the unions represented by SEIU, Local 1014, and the Coalition of County Unions. LACERA has a healthcare consultant, Siegel, and then there are several actuarial firms involved in addition to Milliman. Chiron, who supports the county, and then Rail and Letson supporting the SEIU. So that's our stakeholder group. Moving to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about some funding principles, and those of you that see the pension valuations will probably recognize this type of illustration. And what it's showing is kind of in big picture terms how a funded OPEB or pension plan works. Essentially, contributions come into the plan and form that asset pool. That asset pool is supplemented by investment earnings, depending on how it's invested. And over time, those investment earnings, as the plan matures, should pay for a large portion of the benefits. And that's really why we pre-fund, to take advantage of those investment earnings over time. And then, of course, it's important that the plan be designed to pay out benefits. And then there are expenses as well that go along with administering the plan and investing the assets. So that's in the big picture how it works. The captions talk about some details of which benefits and what the expenses are and earnings and so forth. But that's kind of the big picture of how this plan functions. If we go to the next slide, talk a little bit about highlights. So I'm telling you ahead of time a little bit about what you're going to hear in more detail through Ryan. But this year, from the 2023 valuation to the 2024 valuation, we did have a small increase in the liabilities. The increase is due to normal things like time going by. So when we go 1 year ahead, everybody earns a little bit more benefits if they're still working. And then the interest accrues on that liability. And so that's why the liability grows due simply to the passage of time. We did have some favorable claim cost experience, and we had favorable asset performance this year. So that decreased liabilities a little bit. And since we didn't do an experience study this time, we kept our discount rate at 6.25% for those agents that are pre-funding. And then the non-pre-funding agents are using a 3.5%, which is more of a short-term return since they're not using the OPEB trust. So that's what happened to the liabilities. The employer contributions are progressing. Those employers that are pre-funding are progressing towards what we call the actuarially determined contribution, or ADC for short. The ADC does increase each year a little bit generally, and it did this year in dollar terms, but it did decrease as a percentage of payroll because payroll actually increased a little faster than the ADC did. The county is making good progress to reaching their ADC. We project that'll happen in about 3 years from now. The Superior Court has not put together a funding program yet that will reach their ADC. And LACERA did reach their ADC a few years ago and continues to fund more than the ADC. We also had some slight increases in the active membership and the inactive and retiree membership since last year. So that's the highlights. If we go to the next slide, we have yes, Chair. Mr. Chair, Janet, do you have some background on the courts? Yeah, it's hard for me to say exactly, but yeah, you have some perspective.
Chair Robbins, I don't think that the courts have had the funding ability to pre-fund. They have started a funding policy, but they also can redeem some of the funds from the OPEB trust to pay for benefits, which they have done in the past. So I believe it's not a willingness issue, it's more of an ability.
Yeah, primarily a funding issue is my understanding. We do reach out to the court every year at the end of the fiscal year and ask them for a contribution to the OPEB trust, and they provide what they can based on their budget or budget surplus, or sometimes they don't. So it's a little bit more of a haphazard funding stream from the court based on the revenues from the state, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you. So moving on with this slide, again, these are highlights in just some pictorial form. So the upper left chart there shows the investment returns. We expected 6.25% return for fiscal year ending 6/30/24. What the fund actually earned was 11%. So that's good. We'd like to see that. The funded ratio actually increased from about 13% up to a little over 16% during that time. I know these numbers seem small, but you got to start somewhere, and we're making really good progress. Over time, we'd expect them to continue to increase. The actuarially determined contribution rate stayed fairly steady at about 17%. As I said, it did tick down just a little bit due largely to a payroll increase that was greater than the increase in the dollar amount of the ADC. The actuarial accrued liability, since it's really a present value type of number, as you move forward to the next year, that naturally increases due to interest on that liability, and then accrual of new benefits from the active members. And then you can see the assets are now at about $4 billion. So great progress on pre-funding, and therefore our unfunded liability is maintaining fairly steady profile from 20.4 to 20.7. Over time, we do anticipate that will eventually start coming down when the interest on those assets starts to grow at a more rapid rate. Question?
Yeah, the unfunded, is that about normal, or are we in pretty good shape at this 20% or $20.4?
Yeah, Trustee Oakham. Yeah, for where you are, only having started pre-funding, just what?
10 years.
It's been 10 years. Okay.
Has it been 10 years?
It's been 10 years, but if a pension, most pension plans we look at have been pre-funded for 50 years. And if you look back in time, you'll see that they used to be funded at this level as well. So we're really still in the early stages and ramping our way up on it. But yeah, we view it as good progress at this point. Most of the OPEB plans I work on are not pre-funded at all. So we love to see pre-funding, and you're making good progress.
How long will it take for us to get down to close to a zero number?
Okay, that's a question of funding policy. Right now, LACERA, the LACERA employer agent, is working on a policy that would reach full funding at some point. I don't think they've decided exactly how long. We'll actually talk about that in the next segment, but it could be as soon as 15 years. The county has not had, to my knowledge, those same discussions yet. So it'll depend on pre-funding the policy decisions.
Do you need to have that at zero, or if you're at 5%, is that something that's really safe?
Yeah, that's a great question. At this point, I think you need to keep making progress. Most pension funds, though, tend not to be funded at 100% because they don't necessarily need to be at all times. And it's important that the fund be able to pay the benefits when due. And if you look at your pension funding, it's less than 100%. I don't do a lot of work on the pension, but yeah, it's in the 80 range. And that's still considered healthy because there's plenty of money to pay the benefits as they are coming due. And some unfunded liability is not a problem as long as you have a plan to continue to service that debt, essentially.
Thank you. Did we project, or did you guys project the actuarial accrued liability in 2024 to be 24.7, or is that just a hard number of after the fact?
We actually have a slide on that coming up.
Okay.
Where we look at what we call the gains and losses. So we take last year's, say what we thought it was going to be, and then show you all the ins and outs that got us to where we ended up. Can you wait for that slide?
Yeah. And I just bring it up because based on all the numbers, we have great returns, funded ratio, everything is great, but our unfunded still went up slightly. So
yeah,
I'll wait for
and that's largely a function of your asset funded ratio is still fairly low. So there's not yet been enough time for the interest on those assets to offset the increase in the liability. And that's really where we are. It's not necessarily a bad thing. You're still making good progress. That's why we look at the funded ratio. And as long as it continues to go up, we still view that as good progress, despite the fact that the unfunded liability went up just a little. It's still a higher funded ratio. But yeah, we'll actually get to the gains and losses, and you'll get to see how well did we kind of, estimate where we were going to be versus where we ended up. Thank you.
I'm also reminded when this entire OPEB thing first started,
yes,
how many years it was before we got the county to get off their rear ends and begin to do what they're doing now. I'm sure that cost us a lot, but it was a number of years before anybody over at the Board of Supervisors had made a decision that OPEB was important enough for them to start doing what they need to do in order to fund this.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we worked on this for about 8 years, as Janet noted, until the pre-funding period started. So, but hey, I applaud the pre-funding. Like I say, most of the clients I work with don't pre-fund at all. So I think you can still rest assured that you're doing the right thing. All right, so one more summary slide, and then I'll have Ryan go into more detail. So this slide, again, is breaking down the ADC a little bit more and showing that there's really two components of the ADC. There's what we call the normal cost. And the normal cost is the value of the benefits that were earned in that fiscal year. So 6.5% of payroll in 2023, 6.6% of payroll. So if you can think of it as additional deferred benefit to those people who were working, and it was worth about 6.6% of pay, that benefit during fiscal 23 and 24. And then the orange part of the slide there of the bar is the payment on that unfunded actuarial liability. And because we started 10 years ago at 0% funded, that payment's still pretty large. And over time, we we expect to continued progress towards a higher funded ratio. It is based on a 30-year funding period. That's what we started using really at the inception of GASB 45, and we've stuck with that. Like I said, the LACERA agent employer is looking at shorter funding periods, and those are really needed in order to bring it closer to 100. I mean, it will continue to increase, but without a shorter period and a closed period, not an open period like this is. There is some point when the funding ratio growth will slow down. I think that's all I have to say about this slide, unless there's any other questions. Okay, so Ryan's going to talk a little bit more about the details and get to Trustee Rue's question right here. So go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Yeah, so this is that gain loss slide that Robert was talking about. So what we are doing here is we're showing how we got from the valuation results that we presented last year, the 2023 valuation at the top of this slide, down to our latest valuation results as of July 1st, 2024, down at the bottom. So the first item is just the expected changes over the course of the year. So on the liability side, that's interest on the liabilities, that's normal cost of participants continuing to accrue additional benefits. On the assets, it's contributions that the employers made and investment earnings. So to answer your question, Trustee Rue, what we would expect if there had been no actuarial gains or losses, just a straight forecast from our last valuation, would have been for the UAL to increase from the 20.4 billion it was in 2023 to about 20.9 billion. Now that ended up being only about 20.8 billion because of some gains that we saw during this valuation cycle. But at this point, that's what the forecast is each year, is for slight increases in that UAL. And we'll have some projection slides later where I'll get into that a little bit more about how the UAL is expected to progress into the future. So on the prior slide, please still. On the second half of this in section B, this is getting into the detail of why we do an annual evaluation every year. It's to pull in the new census, update our actuarial assumptions and whatnots around claims costs and trends, and make sure we're having the most up-to-date analysis of what the OPEB trust is needing to be funded at. So each of those items here you can see is that when we evaluated the claims costs, they came in a little bit lower than we were expecting, which caused an actuarial gain. So that dropped liabilities by $250 million. The new trend assumption from the latest models increased liabilities by about $0.4 billion. And then other demographic gains and losses caused liabilities to drop by about $0.1 billion. So the net impact of those was actually that the liabilities came in right at expected at $24.74 billion. But it's important for us to be doing that analysis every year just to keep track of if anything's changing. On the asset side, there was, as Robert mentioned, a good year for investments. Those netted about a $0.16 billion investment gain. So assets came in at nearly $4 billion compared to the 3.8 that would have been expected with just if it earned the 6.25%. And then the net impact of all of that was the UAL ended up at about 20.8 billion compared to the 20.4 billion we were at last year. So then on the next few slides, if we go to the next one, we have different ways of breaking down the liability, just to kind of help you understand what's involved in this OPEB plan. So this slide breaks it down by different types of benefits. The biggest chunk of these liabilities, 77% of the liabilities that we're analyzing, is for the retiree medical benefits. The next largest portion, 17%, is for the Medicare Part B premium reimbursement program. And then the smaller pieces are retiree dental and vision, makes up about 5% of the liabilities. And then there's a small death benefit that retirees get to help pay for funeral costs that makes up about 1% of the liability. On the next slide, we're breaking down that total nearly $25 billion liability in a different way. Here, we're looking at the status of the different members that are involved in the plan. So currently, the liability is split about 50-50 between active members who are still employed and working for the county and retirees who are currently receiving benefits. So on the active member side, the reason that we're accounting for a liability for them is that while they aren't receiving benefits yet, we're projecting that in the future they will receive benefits and they are working towards earning those benefits. And so it's important to recognize that liability now while they're still working because the county is going to have to pay for those in the future. On the retiree side, that's the other half of the liability. Those are the people who are currently receiving benefits. And so that's the cost of the benefits they're receiving and they're projected to receive for the rest of their life. There's also a small sliver in the bottom right here that we're calling the deferred vested. Those are the people who have left employment but haven't yet started their benefits. That make up about 2% of the liability, but we do keep track of them and include them in the valuation. Then on the next slide, we break down the liabilities in one other way, which this is looking at how the liability is distributed amongst the different years. So when we calculate a liability, what we're doing is we are forecasting out over the next 100 plus years. We're showing the first 10 here, but our projections go out 100 plus years for this, of what benefits are going to be paid to members from the county each year. So for example, in 2025, we're projecting about $0.8 billion in benefits that are going to be paid out. If you look out to 2034, that's projected to increase to about $1.5 billion. And so this includes all the retired members, the current active members when they retire, all of those people that we're valuing in this July 1st, 2024 actuarial valuation. That yellow bar makes up what we're calling the liability. So we take all of those projected benefits, we discount them to the present at the assumed investment return of 6.25%, and that's what we call the liability. Now, layered on top of that in this chart, we also are showing the projected OPEB contributions, because this chart also serves another purpose in that what the county and the other agents are currently paying in contributions is split into two pieces. There's the pre-funding piece, and then the pay-go is what we call it. So the pay-go is those benefit payments I was talking about, that $0.8 billion in 2025 projected out to about $1.5 billion in 2034. Each year, all of the agents are making contributions to cover those benefits. In addition, they're making pre-funding contributions on top of that. So these blue bars, that pre-funding schedule that the county and these other pre-funding agents have established. All right, so then on the next slide, we'll get into some historical information and then I'll lead into the projections. So this slide's got a lot on it. I'm gonna kind of just jump to the bottom here and just point out that, as Robert mentioned, there was no change in assumptions this year. This was not an experience study year. So the investment assumption stayed at 6.25% for the pre-funding agents, stayed at 3.5% for the outside districts, and there were no significant changes in the valuation.
Why is that different, 3.5 for the outside districts? Why is that so low?
Yeah, so the outside districts are not pre-funding, and the way we do the actuarial evaluation is we look at the interest rate that we use is based on the investment earnings that the assets that are going to be used to pay for the benefits is going to earn. So for the pre-funding agents, they've set up this trust and invested it in a strategic way such that we expect it will earn 6.25% each year. For those outside districts that aren't pre-funding, it's just being paid out of general funds. And so we just use the short-term return that we expect those general funds to get.
Those were the three districts that
there's
about earlier.
4 of them. Yeah.
4 of them.
Yeah, Little Lake,
okay.
LAFCO, SCA QMD, and LACO. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then on the next slide, we are looking at some more history. So this is looking at the active membership, or the membership counts of the 3 different statuses I talked about: actives, deferred vesteds, and retirees. So currently, the majority of the members that we're including in the evaluation are active members. That membership has tended to be increasing over time, but it does fluctuate up and down a bit as just county employment changes over time. What we call the inactive groups, the vested, terminated, and the retirees, those have seen a much more steady and significant increase over time. And that's what we expect with any sort of plan as it's maturing, as it's going along for an additional amount of time. You have more and more members retiring and being in that retirement status. So we expect that to continue to climb. So then on the next slide, we are looking at the history of the liabilities and the assets. So if we start with the blue line at the top, the liabilities, prior to about 2018, those liabilities were largely driven by changes in short-term interest rates, because that was before we adopted that 6 was 6, now it's 6.25 pre-funding interest rate assumption. Now that we've adopted that as part of the recognizing that there are assets set aside to pre-fund these benefits, the liabilities will be much more stable and just tend to just steadily increase over time with interest and growth. There will still be a little bit of fluctuations, like it's not a perfectly smooth line after that still, because we have experience studies, there'll be demographic and claims gain losses, et cetera, but you should see it just much more steady growth now. On the asset side, the yellow line at the bottom, you can see in 2014, when pre-funding started, there was the initial 0.48 billion of seed money put in. That has since grown. We're at about nearly 4 billion as of this last valuation. That's due to investment earnings and contributions from these pre-funding agents. Then on the next slide, we're looking at how the employer contributions compare to what we calculate with current terminology is the actuarially determined contribution. That's the contribution amount that Robert was talking about earlier. So prior to 2014, if we're looking at just that yellow line, the funding that was going in was just what we call the pay-go cost. The agents were just paying for the benefits that were due to retirees in each of those years. 2014, you have that spike. As in addition to the pay-go, there was the large amount of seed money put in to start pre-funding. And then since then, you have increases in contributions as in part due to this pay-go cost increase, but also because the agents are putting increasingly large amounts of pre-funding contributions into the plan. So the intent of the county at the moment is that they will be slowly ramping up those contributions, as you see with that yellow line, until it gets and catches up to what we are calculating as the actuarial determined contribution up at that blue line. So as Robert mentioned, and we'll show in the projections later, we're projecting about 3 years from now is when those lines will converge. So on the next slide, I believe we're getting into some projection. So this is the same two bits of information, but just this time shown as a percentage of payroll. Just a little bit different look at it. You can see that once again, prior to 2018, the actual determined contribution was a little bit volatile as the short-term interest rates were changing. Now that we're on using the expected return as the interest rate, it's more stable, and there's just been a slight decline due to the funded status of the plan improving and gains and losses occurring. Yellow line looks pretty much the same as the prior slide, steadily increasing. It'll catch up the blue line in about 3 years, what projecting. Okay, so then the next slide, here's where we're starting getting some projections. So two things I want to point out before I dive into the numbers here. First is that up until now, everything we've been showing is for the entirety of the LACERA OPEB plan, all of the agents. For these projections, we're focusing just on the county portion. Now, the county makes up the vast majority of these liabilities, but we do want to point out that this is excluding the LACERA agents, Superior Court, and those outside districts, whereas those were included in the prior slides. Second thing I want to point out is that with this shorter valuation timeline that Ted was talking about at the beginning of this, we actually haven't gotten to the points in the valuation and the year yet where we do updated projections. So these slides are showing the same projections that we showed you last year. We're actually in the middle of doing those projections right now as part of the GASB reporting, but we wanted to present things to you sooner as the valuation results were done, and so we're still showing last year's projections. That being said, there aren't material changes generally in projections from year to year, so it's still valuable to go through these. Okay, so looking at this, here's where this is projecting out what the actuarial accrued liability will do over time and the assets. What we're projecting is that the liabilities are expected over the next 50 years to grow to about $70 billion. The assets with contributions and the funding policies that are currently in place and investment earnings are expected to grow to about $42 billion. So there's two things I want to point out here. One is that the assets are making, over time with these current funding policy, the assets are making up a larger portion of those liabilities, or they are covering a larger portion of those liabilities. So the next slide will show that a bit more, but I want to focus on this one a bit for longer. The second point is that the difference between that blue and yellow line, that's the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. That's the about $25 billion today. You can see that as you project that out going forward, that's the magnitude of the difference between those two lines is not projected to decrease. It's projected to increase a little bit over time. That gets into what Robert was talking about with that 30-year open amortization period. What that means is that every year when we do our valuation, we're looking at what the unfunded actuarial accrued liability is on that new valuation date and re-amortizing it over a new 30-year period. And then when we do next year's valuation, we're going to re-amortize it again over a new 30-year period. So that period is never shrinking. It's always being re-amortized. And when you re-amortize liabilities every year like that over a period as long as 30 years, while you do make progress on the funded ratio, the percentage, the ratio of the assets liabilities, when you just look at the dollar difference between the two, the UAL that we calculate, that will actually tend to increase over time because the funding isn't aggressive enough to shrink that. So then on the next slide, we show that funded ratio projection. And here's where what I was saying is that the ratio of those assets liabilities is improving over time. Like this funding policy will increase benefit security in the sense that the assets are covering a larger portion of the liabilities over time. That being said, like Robert mentioned, it will tend to taper off and reach a plateau, and you're never gonna, with this sort of forecast, it's never gonna get to 100% funded with the 30-year rolling amortization. To get to 100% funded, you would need to adopt a more aggressive policy like we'll talk about later that LACERA is considering as an agent.
Yeah, does that 30 billion reduce itself as we're funding, or is it always going to be 30 billion?
So how that's going to change depends on the funding policy. With what we're showing in these projections, that 30-year rolling amortization funding policy, it's actually projected to increase a little bit over time.
Is that a problem?
I wouldn't say it's a problem. I'd say that the closer you can get to 100% funded, the better it is for the system and the members. That being said, getting to 59% funded is a lot better than staying at zero.
But it seems like we thought we were going to be with this funding, you know, in 40 or 50 years, we were going to be close to fully funded. That doesn't, what your projections now are saying that we're not going to be fully funded down the road.
Well, yeah, I'll just add a little bit. So with the 30, I think in order to get farther ahead, I think we're in the first phase of funding, okay? And the first phase was let's just start pre-funding and let's do it with a 30-year rolling amortization. So it's really a matter of going back and saying, now that we're pre-funding, when we can afford it, we need to start thinking about a shorter amortization. So it's really the 30-year that needs to change. And it's really up to the employers to do that.
Do you have some projections down the road of what it's going to take and, you know, different amounts to bring it to 15, bring it to 20, to bring it to 10? Do you guys have that?
Yes, we'll actually talk a little bit about that in the next segment when we talk about what LACERA is looking at. They're looking at much shorter periods. Yeah.
Is that something we're going to approach the county with?
Yeah, so I think we're talking about two different things right now. Right now, we're talking about the county's funding of the entire OPEB program, you know, the 96% that they own.
Right.
Next segment, we're talking about LACERA's funding. Once we get the LACERA portion finalized in a good draft and a good policy, we can certainly share that with the county. They might be interested to see what we're doing on the LACERA side and what they can do on the county side to decrease that gap. Last year with 2023, the experience study, we did talk to the county and their actuaries, Chiron, and also Ray Letts and the union's actuary about the 30-year amortization. At that time, there was no appetite to lower that, to change that assumption and lower it. What back of the napkin is if you lower that assumption, if you change it to 20 years, probably increases contributions.
Right.
Better funding, but increases contributions. County didn't have an appetite for it at that particular time. For the county's program, we will talk to the county again in 2026 about that 30-year assumption and whether there's an appetite at that time to change that assumption and again, close that funding gap.
Okay, you're going to have, though, stepped up numbers that will show what it's going to take to bring it to 20. What is a safe number there then, would you say, with the funding? What we got 30, what is safe?
You're not going to like this answer.
Zero?
It depends on where the plan is in its life cycle. So for a brand new plan that doesn't have any retirees yet, and all these plans start out that way generally, the funded ratio doesn't have to be that high yet. But when you're at as we showed earlier, you're at a point where it's 50-50. When you're 50-50 and moving farther forward, then you need to have a program that's going to get you, I would say, into the 80 to 100% range. That's viewed as a pretty good range in general.
So
So-
just as point of reference, trustee Oakham, on the pension side, we moved from 30-year to 20-year layered amortization. So we did shorten it to the 20-year. So currently there's no layers above 20 years at this point. So each layer is a 20-year, and then I think there's about 10 or 12 layers right now, maybe a little less than that, maybe about 7 or 8 layers, and they're all less than 20 years because those layers get amortized. So you set the amortization policy, then you can also pay off each layer as you go through. So
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea to get the county to do what we need to do with 5 supervisors rather than 9, because you never know what's going to happen down the road. So we've got about, 7 or 8 years to do that. And hopefully this group will understand that.
Right. Yep. Great, thank you.
Okay, so on the next slide, we've got one last bit of projections. So this is looking at the contributions. So that blue line, once again, is the ADC that we're projecting out. It's about the $1.5 billion currently, and projected to increase to about $3 billion over the next 50 years, 30 years, sorry. The yellow line is showing the projections of what the actual contributions that the county would make according to their funding policy. It's there, like we mentioned earlier, they're still working their way towards increasing the contributions to even catch up to that ADC. So they're not even to that 30-year open rolling amortization yet. Once they get there, that's when it seems like there could be more appetite for looking at, can we continue that pattern of increased contributions at the rate they were before, or do they need to taper down to just meet the ADC like shown here? That seems like it'd be a good time where they'd start to be more open to having conversations like that. So with that, on our next slide, I think we just have this is just mentioning the assumptions we use in case there's any questions, but I think that's it for our presentation. We stand for any questions that you guys have.
Thanks for the presentation, guys. Just in the initial report from staff, Ted, I just had a question on the, I know a lot of it's based on the assumptions, but the $10 million difference from the outgoing, the benefits paid. I noticed you guys recognize that people signed up to less expensive plans was really the biggest contributing factor. I guess where I'm going with, I don't know, it seems like a large amount of money in assumption, 897 to the 907 projected. And I just wanted to know that process and that assumptions how does that fit into it? I mean, $10 million it seems like a lot. I mean, tell me if it's not, but you understand my question?
Yeah, so I can talk to the process a bit of how we're analyzing that. So every 3 years when you do the experience study, a big thing that we're looking at is predicting member behavior. First question is just when they retire, are they going to choose to participate in the OPEB plan or not? Because it's optional. The second thing is if they do retire, what plans are they going to elect and how many dependents are they going to enroll? There's a lot of uncertainty with members can make lots of decisions there. There's quite a few options that they have. Each time we do the experience study, we look at the history of over that 3-year period and prior periods of what members were choosing around those things. But there's going to be some deviations each year when we do the annual evaluations, which is the big reason why we do these annual evaluations, to report on how that experience has differed from what we expected. And so as those deviations accumulate, that's why we do that experience study again every 3 years, is to realign our assumptions back with what member behavior is actually doing. Mm-hmm.
I guess the last thing is that that 3-year period, that gap is that as far as the contribution rate and the unfunded liability spectrum or whatnot, again, looking more closer to the current date, not the 20-year, 30-year projection. How does that kind of over assumption impact the contribution, negatively or positive? Or is it just part of the process?
Yeah, so like if we're looking at this year's valuation, on that gain loss slide, we showed that there was a slight gain this year to, we labeled it other demographics, but it's in large part, it's due to those election decisions you were talking about. And you can see on there that it did lower the ADC as a percentage of payroll by a little bit. So we are constantly updating the ADC calculation based on what the experience is showing. And then when we do the experience study, that's when we'll make that big realignment to match with match our future projections up with what the recent experience is showing.
That's the project assumption for the last slide.
Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
You're referring to this slide, right?
Yeah, so if you can go back to, I don't remember which slide number it was the first one I presented on, like 11 or something like that.
12, I think it's 12.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we go. So that other experience gain loss line here, we were showing that there was the $0.13 billion gain on the actual accrued liability. If you go to the far right of this slide in that same row, you can see the 0.2% decrease in the ADC as a percentage of payroll. So that was the impact that's largely those retirement elections, in addition to a couple other things, had on what we're calculating as the ADC each year. Yeah.
Just a couple of other comments, Trustee Green. I know you asked about this on the pension side with the Board of Investments. We still believe that we're following actuarial standards in terms of performing the experience study every 3 years and taking a look at the that's very much in line, and we feel like that's a frequent enough review of the assumptions. And also in terms of, we're performing the evaluations annually, which is another very frequent cycle in preparing these reports. And I think Milliman does a really great job of analyzing those results, the expected versus the actual. So I feel like we are on track in terms of measuring these things and watching them. And again, if there's significant deviations on an annual report, Milliman will come to us and say, hey, we might need to make an adjustment midstream in between in between an experience study cycle, if we do need to make adjustments. So I just want to try to provide you with a little bit of assurance that we think we're measuring and reporting these things pretty frequently. And, the deviations don't seem to be an issue at this point, and we would raise that if they were.
Yeah, no, thanks for readdressing that. I recall exactly what you said before, that we can call an audible, which is great. And I do have confidence in the process. I just, we're just looking at that, assumptions are assumptions. It's fascinating math, really. I mean, we have them in fire behavior and stuff like that. So, by definition, they're assumptions, but it is the process. And thanks for clarifying it. And thank you, Ted, for going that over again. And yeah, total confidence in the process. And I do love the ability for us midstream, if something really goes gunny sack, that we can, sound the alarm and make the adjustments. So thank you.
Yeah, and do really appreciate you looking at the results and asking questions, definitely.
Any other questions? This first part is done.
Yes.
Need a motion and a second to approve it.
I'll move. Second.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Razzo?
Aye.
Ms. Fizzler?
Aye.
Mr. Rue? Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Ms. Langton? Ms. Ginsburg? Mr. Oakham?
Aye.
Chair Robbins?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously by all trustees present.
Great.
Thank you very much. I got a quick question for you, Ted, though. I would assume that once retiree health care number 2 really kicks in, where the employees have to pay for their dependent health care, that should have a significant impact on these numbers. Am I assuming facts, not in evidence, or?
So we're talking about tier 2.
Because I don't think we have any idea how many employees are really going to be happy. I mean, are going to foot the bill for their dependent health care, but that all changes in 10 years.
Yes, Mr. Chair, you are correct. The projections did include our estimate of what might happen when those people retire, but you're right, hardly any of them have retired yet. So it's a lot of assumptions at this point. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know how to put the thing up here. I'm looking, but anyway, when that happens, I mean, the only healthcare they're not gonna have kids when they retire, that they're
Oh,
gonna put in healthcare.
don't assume that fact. You don't know safety people.
We're talking about that much.
Operation population.
Usually, I mean, right now, we cover everybody. So we have when does that started, what year that they have to pay for family?
2014.
14?
14.
14.
And we haven't projected anything, how that's gonna work and how that's gonna affect these numbers. Have you?
It's included in our
Oh, it
projections.
is. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
But again, no one's, very few people have reached retirement. So we haven't actually seen it. We're making our best guess right now, making assumptions as to what will happen. Yeah.
So just for context, July 2013, Tier 2 was invoked, which means that the dependents are no longer covered under the retiree healthcare program. So Tier 1, it's a primary and a dependent can be covered under the healthcare program. Beginning 2013, it's only the primary pensioner that's covered. And what Milliman is saying is that there's a lag effect. We haven't seen that effect yet. So Milliman is trying to project that in the liabilities, but we haven't actually seen that happen. We don't have any experience, not a lot of experience with that as of today. So
That's only hires after the 13th of July, correct?
correct.
Anybody before, okay.
Yes, correct.
And brief, through the chair, brief clarification on that. The dependents could be covered under Tier 2, but they would have to pay. So, they would still be eligible, but it would be on the member's dime.
One other thing I'd like to add, Trustee Oakham, is in our report in Appendix J, we're doing an analysis now on each valuation where we look at how much has been saved so far with the Tier 2. We were asked to add that section to our report, so you can at least look in the rearview mirror and see how much less money was
Yeah, but
spent.
you haven't had anybody retire after.
35 people
Really?
so far. Most of them, I think, are disability retirements, but
And there's,
you're not on. There you go.
excuse me, through the chair, trustee, there are a few PEPRA plans where someone could retire after 5 years of experience, and so they're starting to filter in.
Yeah, but it's a small number still. Yeah.
In that appendix, in addition to looking at how much has been saved so far, which like you mentioned is a pretty small number, we also show our forecast of how much is going to be saved in the future and how much the current liability is lessened by the fact that Tier 2 exists.
Thank you very much. We're going to go on to item 11A.
Okay, sure. Great.
Yeah, Chair Robbins, just some brief comments before we tee up the next item. First, appreciate Milliman's presentation. I think, when we talk about actuarial analysis in plain language, it's kind of an oxymoron, but I thought you guys did a really good job walking through the OPEB. So the next step, as was mentioned during the presentation, is really LACERA centric, and we're focusing on pre-funding. This came through last year. This was brought up as part of our budget process. The team talked about the ADC, the actual determined contribution, and LACERA, as one of the agents, as well as the county, has consistently made their ADC payments. But over the last few years, we've exceeded that through our budget underspent. And last year, Trustee Kehoe, you called out to have something a little bit more formalized, more structured, and that's in essence our update here with the team, with Ted and the Milliman team. So that's kind of the tee up. So I'll pass it to Ted and the team to go over our progress.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Louis. And
Ted, one last thing. I just wanted to thank you for the presentation. You were real careful to not go too fast. I watched you every time, and you'd finish the section, you'd look around and see if anybody was ready to raise their hand. But you guys did a really good job. You made a complicated subject less complicated.
Well,
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
great. Thank you.
And
for that.
enjoy your retirement.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been an honor to see the chair approve so many great decisions and continue to have very thoughtful conversations. I've also really enjoyed working with all the stakeholders and the systems, accounting, legal, and retiree healthcare teams. And I'll keep all the 170,000 members in my thoughts.
Great. Okay, and so Louis teed this up very well. We're shifting gears a little bit. We're going to talk about the LACERA specific agent plan and the funding thereof. And I think the short answer to Mr. Kehoe's question from last year is we're making progress, but it's complicated. So we'll walk through that. We do have a lot of slides. I'm going to talk a lot. I'm just going to try to not go too fast, but the information is contained in the slides. So hopefully I can educate the board and also give you a status of where we're at in terms of the LACERA pre-funding update. So this is the agenda. I will talk a little bit about the OPEB trust, the agent plan. At the end, Milliman will come in and have some comments on the technical side of things. Next slide, please, Bonnie. Okay, so again, education, a little bit of information for some of the newer trustees on the board. This is in reference to LACERA's participation in the RHC program and the OPEB trust, again, LACERA specific. And it's an update of our plan LACERA's plan to pre-fund the participation in the RHC program. Next slide, please. Okay, so of course, LACERA is an employer plan sponsor. We can't forget that. I know we have this very large, significant retiree population. Most of it's retirees from the county, a couple outside districts, and of course, LACERA is part of that population. Employees are members of the pension plan. They become eligible for the RHC program. Again, the RHC program is sponsored by the County of Los Angeles. LACERA administers that program. One thing the accountants did was we really messed up the language. The accountants like to call it OPEB. So when I say RHC, I'm really referring to Cassandra and her team, but from the accounting perspective, from the actuarial perspective, we call it OPEB. So I just want to clarify that. All right. Okay, so the OPEB trust, I said I would mention this, established in 2012. Initially, the county provided some funding they had on deposit at LACERA via some contribution offsets. Basically, the county used their funding to fund the pension plan, and then they provided new funding for the OPEB trust to the tune of about $450 million at that time. LACERA also said we wanted to participate in lockstep as an employer in that trust, create a savings account. That's essentially what the OPEB trust is. The court also created their separate trust a couple of years later. So we have two trusts, the county LACERA and the court, second trust, 3 participants. These trusts are managed by the Board of Investments. They manage it as one investment trust. It's a separate thing from the pension plan. There's a separate investment policy statement. It's separate from the pension fund assets, of course, and they do their pooling and their investment allocation and all the things that they need to do to invest this OPEB trust. Right now, trust fund flows, benefits are not paid out of the trust. The contributions come in, we get investment earnings on the trust, we pay custodian fees, investment management fees. So it's just an investment trust at this point. Next slide, please, Bonnie. Okay, so I mentioned the accounting standards. GASB came along. We re-upped GASB 43 and 45, the OPEB standards. We re-upped them to 74 and 75 in 2017, 2018. One of the things we did was we separated out the employers into an agent model. The county requested this. The county said, okay, we're re-upping the standards. We're getting some new GASB reports for our financial statements. On the actuarial side, we want to separate out, on the accounting side, we want to separate out the employers into their specific agents. So there was an opportunity and the county took it. So we have an agent plan structure that's presented in our valuation report that we just talked about. It's also on our accounting records internally at LACERA. We talked a little bit about this earlier. The 3 agents in the trust, the county, the court, and LACERA, 3 separate agents, and then the outside districts are lumped together in the valuation report. So that's kind of how we look at the different employers. Next slide, please. Okay, again, a little bit of a repeat. Pay as you go. Those monies are coming out of LACERA's budget to pay for the LACERA retirees and the ongoing pay-go costs, the OPEB costs of the plan for retirees, basically their medical premiums. Pre-funding, that's contributions from LACERA's budget going to the trust. The county puts together a projection, a 5-year projection, and LACERA participates in that funding for the OPEB trust in lockstep with the county. I think we're about 0.46 or 0.47% of that total contribution. County determines that, we participate. Recently, back in 2022, the CEO came to me and said, hey, Ted, how can we up the OPEB trust contribution amount for LACERA. And so I talked to Laura, she does our budget, and Laura said, well, if there's any budget surplus, maybe we could give extra money to the OPEB trust on LACERA's behalf at the end of the year. So we said, great, let's do that. It's included in the budget policy that the board approves. We basically double our initial OPEB trust contribution. So if $3.5 million is budgeted for the OPEB trust contribution, at the end of the year, we have a budget surplus. We work with the budget team. We can contribute an additional $3.5 million so we can double our OPEB trust contribution. We've done that for the last 3 fiscal years. In terms of numbers, are not necessarily on this slide, but we are actually slightly exceeding the actuarial determined contribution by making that additional budgeted contribution to the OPEB trust for LACERA. Next slide, please. Okay, here we go. I put a bunch of numbers on here. I'll try to go through them one by one. As of June 30, 2024, we had about 446 active employees at LACERA. That's our active employee base, if you will. The retirees at that time were measured at 221. We had 189 folks participating in the retiree healthcare program. So not everybody participates in the healthcare program, but a large majority obviously do. Again, for the LACERA agent, LACERA piece, 82.7 million is our AAL, actuarial accrued liability. Our OPEB trust balance for just LACERA's portion was 21.7. The unfunded for LACERA, this is what we're looking at funding, is the $61 million in unfunded liability. Our funded ratio for LACERA is about 26%. That's about double of what the county is. So that additional funding is making a difference for LACERA itself. And finally, our OPEB trust 10-year investment return was 7.1. I put that in there just to see that we're beating the 6.25% in terms of our LACERA portion of the OPEB trust. Next slide, please. Okay, couple of numbers in terms of funding. I mentioned earlier the PAYGO, that's the money that comes out of our budget to pay the costs every month, is 2.5. And then we have the pre-funding contributions is 4.3. So that includes that additional contribution, the budgeted and the additional. So we're at about 6.8. That 1, 2, 3, fourth line down, the ADC, the 5.5 million, as you can see, we're a little bit ahead of the 5.5 million. So Robert mentioned we're in a good place right now. OPEB trust contributions inception to date, 9.3. So we're in a good spot. As I mentioned, what do we want to do? We want to start formalizing LACERA's funding plan. That's really what we're here to give you an update on and what we've been talking with Milliman about over the last, within the last year or so. So next slide, please. Okay, so funding plan considerations. What are we going to do? Are we just going to keep overfunding it? Are we just going to kind of guess? No, we want to formalize it. Couple of things we've talked with Milliman about so far. Fixed time period. Well, you can set a date. If you set that date with everything that happens with the population that Milliman talked about, those fluctuations, with things that happen in the investment market on the funding side, you have to have some volatility in your contributions. That's not super helpful for budgeting. If I tell Laura we need 6 million this year and we need 12 million for the OPEB for next year, again, not helpful for budgeting. So that one is, there's some challenges there. Fixed schedule of contributions. Again, I go to Laura, I say, well, let's fund this thing at 7 million a year. Well, we may not get there as soon as we thought. It may be 15 years later, and the board is looking at us going, how come we're not fully funded yet on the OPEB side for LACERA? So we're talking with Milliman about the hybrid methods, and that's why I mentioned it gets complicated. So these are all the assumptions that can go into LACERA's funding plan. We're talking about amortization. We're talking about setting up the investment smoothing, for example. Setting all of these sort of actuarial assumptions rather than fixing the period or fixing the cost. We want to dive into that, and so that part we're starting to get into with Milliman. What that does is those tools or those levers that the actuary uses, they stabilize the contributions for LACERA. So I can go to Laura and I can say, this year, the contribution is 6 million. Next year, it's 6.5 or 7 million. It helps us, LACERA, manage, and the board and the trustees manage the budget. So that's why we want to employ the hybrid method and use some of those tools. So next slide, please, Bonnie. So next steps, we want to develop a funding plan. We're working on that with Milliman right now. We also want to develop a formal funding policy. We've got some of the concepts or some of the principles from our actuarial funding policy on the pension side that we put together with Milliman Pension Consultants. The takeaway here basically is that we want to come back to the board with some funding options. We want to explore these options internally with Milliman first and bring some options back to the board and talk about some of those hybrid methods and what kinds of things we would want to employ at LACERA. So that's kind of the status of where we're at. Trustee Moore, did you have a question? No? Oh, okay. Just kind of, no, your face, it just looked like you might have a question. Okay, well, I'll pause right there.
Well, going back to the 4.3 million.
Yes.
Was that inclusive or exclusive of the budget underrun that was added? You get what I mean? We underran our administrative budget for the year, so we took the surplus and used that to pay our OPEB.
Yes.
Requirement. So that's included in the 4.3, or that is the 4.3?
It is included in the 4.3. So let me break it down real quick on the slide. So there's 3 components here. The 2.5 was the PAYGO. And then in that bolded text, the annual pre-funding, there's actually 2 numbers in there. It would have been the a little over 2 million would be doubled. It would have been budgeted at 2 million. The 2.1 or 2.2, and then we would have added the additional 2 million to get you to the 4.3. So
okay, so in just my few years of experience, we've consistently underrun our budget, our administrative budget. And then there's a percentage of pension fund assets that are allowable for administrative costs, and we've never budgeted to that number. So I'm seeing that there's money there that could be used, obligation much sooner than 30 years, much sooner than 15, within the guidelines that we already have for funds available for us to do that. Now, there might be an issue of perception and image and all that stuff, but the money is there. So when I looked at the charts, that you provided with the different normal costs and the amortization of our unfunded liability at 15 and 30. And then the other component that I'm just braising, where's that money coming from? It seems like the money is there for us to get that obligation fully funded within a relatively short period of time. And of course, relative is relative to an infinite fund.
Right.
But it's there.
Right.
Laura?
To the chair, if I may, Trustee Moore, the team, we've been talking about this for a few months, and certainly there are a lot of choices here. So for trustees who are new to our process, we'll be talking, our JOGC is coming up on April 23rd, and we'll be talking about our budget at that point for the 25-26 year. And one of the components of that is we have a appropriation limit of 21 basis points of our actuarial accrued liability. And so that's sort of our spending limit that we, under SERL, we are allowed to spend for our administrative costs of the pension plan. That's our spending limit. LACERA's approach has always been to not, we want to have lots of cushion because things happen, but also that any dollar that is not expended for a legitimate plan purpose is going to be invested and put into that pool of assets and is able then to be used to pay our benefits, which is what we really are here to do. So from a staff's perspective, we really try to keep our expenditures to be those that are really legitimately and necessary to efficiently and effectively operate the system. So this whole, I say all that because one of the things we looked at in terms of funding as an employer, funding our employees' retirement healthcare costs or OPEB costs is PAYGO is not the most is kind of expensive, right? I mean, when you can have those assets in the trust earning the contribution or earning the investment returns like we do our pension plan, it saves us money, it saves the plan money down the road. So the question really becomes how quickly you want to do that. So to Trustee Moore's point, we have enough surplus where we could pay down that unfunded liability and just be 100% funded next year. However, that means those funds are being used, those funds are not earning interest, right? They're not invested for other purposes. So we're trying to figure out what an appropriate balance is. The other thing is that it kind of puts, I think, pressure on our plan sponsor in a way that may not be appropriate. They can't afford to do something like that. So what we are hoping to do with this proposal, which is, and there's a range of what's appropriate, is to give options that allow us to be more forward thinking, to be more efficient down the road, but also to demonstrate a reasonable plan that our plan sponsors can look at to say, if we can afford this, this makes more sense for us, and this is something that might be more reasonable for them. So we may choose to do something to fund it, to get fully funded in, let's say, 15 years. And they may say, you know what, that's great. We can't do that. We can't afford to do that, but maybe we could afford to do it in 30. And really kind of think about how they can use the experience that we gain here at LACERA to better suit this. Now, to the county's credit, that pre-funding that they've been doing, and their policy has really been helpful, and we were mimicking that, but we've just accelerated that, and we'd like to formalize that acceleration even further. But so could we do what what you are saying, why don't we do that? That's the reason why we didn't think that was a reasonable approach, is that those funds then can't be invested in the future. And it also kind of makes it seem like an impossible dream for other plan sponsors, because doing something is better than doing nothing. And we want to be able to kind of demonstrate a more reasonable approach. It's also funds that, those are plan assets, right? So we're trying to be just as prudent as we can be in all of this. So we think there's probably a sweet spot of balancing the paying it down more quickly, and over what period of time, and what we could earn on those investments by our investment team. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, thank you for that.
Ms. Kehoe, and then Ms.
But ultimately,
yeah.
it's the board's decision.
Yeah, I
right?
understand what you mean by, there's a perception that we also have to be conscious of between the county and the other participants in the plan. But the point is that we have the ability to do that.
Yes, we do.
And as you said, we just got to find the right number, the right way to present it, so we can take this off of the table over the next 10, 15 years, and then it doesn't become a drag, and all of the money that we would have spent on this incremental approach can go into the pension fund's assets. And in long run, everyone will benefit from getting rid of this obligation as soon as we can.
So,
Mr. Kehoe, Mr. Rue, and Mr. Green.
thank you. So I have two comments. I'll start off with the first one. Wayne, thank you very much for bringing that up, because that was going to be something I was going to grab onto, and this has really teed it up for where I think we need to go. So, number one, I don't think we need to compare ourselves with the plan sponsor or anybody else on it. We are our own organization. We have our own funding sources. We are completely different as far as that goes. So although I respect that they will have different challenges than us, we don't have the same challenges, and we should not limit ourselves because of those challenges. So I say that as one trustee, but I hope that the board would support that. I think we need to resolve it if we can, and as quickly as we can. I was going to ask, why are we only doubling that? Why aren't we looking at tripling or quadrupling or maximizing it? And the reality is this: the money that we budget and we don't spend remains in the investment pool. We're not generating money other than through our investment side. So that money is sitting in investment pool. So essentially what we're saying is, do we want to shift our money from the basic investment pool over to the OPEB investment pool to offset and reduce our liabilities? Or do we want it to sit here and to continue to grow on the investment side of the shop? To me, it's a no-brainer. This is a problem. We have the money. Let's pay off our debt, do it overnight if we can, whatever we can within the maximum limit, even if we just do it in 1 year or 2 years, and shift that money over to pay it off. And I understand that the plan sponsor won't be able to do that because they have significantly more limitations on their budget, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do that. So I seriously think that staff should relook at that, reanalyze it, and possibly come up with a method on paying that off as quickly as possible, so we could be a model for everybody else, and that we can reduce our liability on that end. So I think this is a very low hanging fruit that could be resolved.
Certainly the period of time that we want to, do we sort of first goal, do we want to get to 100% funded? Or do we want to just kind of work toward it? And then how quickly, if we want to get to 100% funded, how quickly do we want to get to 100% funded? These are all this is why we wanted to bring this to you, because there's a lot of choices. And so we propose some, and I think the Milliman is going to present some models. They've been sharing some models with us. So certainly there's lots of, the good news is there's no wrong answer, right? It's really, what do you as a body want to do? How do you want to do it? We can afford to do whatever you want to do. And there are definitely, benefits to paying it down quicker. So maybe you want to move forward, maybe that would be helpful. And then at the end, we'll get direction from you all.
What happens if we're overfunded and we have an excess of funds?
Well, it depends on how we structure the policy. Once we set up the policy, I'm thinking back to like the pension side, it could supplement the retiree benefits. I mean, there could be, it could be a number of different things we could do. It's not a bad thing to be overfunded, because as we see when Milliman does the calculations, sometimes things go in favor. We get actuarial gains, which are good, and sometimes we have actuarial losses. So I'm thinking back to the history of the pension fund, and at one point we were 103% funded after the county sold the obligation bonds back in, I want to say, the mid 90s. I want to say about 1996. And we started talking about the excess earnings, right? Greg wrote the policy on the funding policy at the time. We had a couple of down years on the investment cycle, and we quickly became underfunded, right? So we can build that into the policy. There could be some choices there.
So the reality is we can shift it right back to the investment pool. So the reality is we move the money from the investment pool over to pay off our OPEB, get us 100% funded. And if it turns out we overestimated, we make too much money, we offset some of our costs, which reduce how much money we take out of the investments. To me, that's the wise policy to do. And I'd love to hear what the direction is going to be on that. I do have one other comment. Ted, thank you very much for everything you presented to date. It's really trailblazing on a lot of this stuff. And I was going to ask, have we relayed this to the plan sponsor so that they might consider moving down? Obviously, they can't do everything we just talked about, but maybe they can consider to build that within their own policy and learn from some of our successes. Have we been kind of cross-pollinating with them and letting them know these are things that you could consider doing on your end?
Short answer is, to a limited extent at this point. The plan was to get something a little bit more formal on the LACERA side and work with the county CEO's office and share that information with them. Had a conversation with them, I want to say within the last year about, just in passing, hey, LACERA is going to start working on something. Does the county want to start working on something? Preliminary answer from the county was not really, not at this time. You guys do your thing. Let's take a look at that down the road. So haven't shared anything formal yet with the county because we don't have anything set up yet.
Perfect. Well, I mean, I would encourage you that whatever the outcome of the board's decision is and what we do, it would be interested in providing to them, and then it's up to them on how they proceed on their end. But at least that way they have things to think about when they're building their own policies.
Will do.
Yes, Chair Robinson, trustees, some of these ideas may require restructuring of the OPEB trust. Currently, we're participating through the county trust. That trust is structured for tax reasons as a lockbox. It's one way. Money goes in, it has to stay there for the exclusive purposes of the OPEB trust. So we're talking about overfunding and taking that money and shifting back to the trust. And this is going to require consultation with tax counsel, but that's probably not going to be possible. However, and we may not want it to be possible on the county side or on the Superior Court side. As we more significantly fund LACERA's portion of the trust, we may want to consider setting up a third trust, a separate trust that, like the other two, would feed up to the master trust and be commingled for investment purposes. But we might want to consider setting up a separate OPEB trust for LACERA.
Great idea.
Mr. Root.
Thank you. As a newer BOR trustee, this is great learning opportunity. So I actually have some more basic questions. So there's 4 plans right now, right? Superior Court, LACERA, LA County, and the outside districts for agent plans.
So yeah, there's technically 7 employers is the way we look at it.
Okay. Yeah. So and we created it ours in 2012. So was that when we did that, was that a requirement or was that a choice? I'm just wondering.
That was a choice by the county. It was a choice.
By the county, not us.
Not us.
Okay. And what's the benefits or and I have some other follow-up questions, but I want to hear from you. What are the benefits or the drawbacks of having it separate?
From the county's perspective, so initially, like the pension fund, the OPEB program for all the years was set up as a cost-sharing program. Everybody shares in the costs of the program sort of equally. On the accounting side, if the county separates, when the county decided to separate out and become an agent plan, the costs are allocated to each agent. So the OPEB trust costs are allocated based on the proportionate share. And then on the administrative side, those costs are allocated to each employer in terms of the administrative costs of running the program. So the benefit is the county is looking specifically at their costs and their liability. That's the advantage for the county. Same with LACERA. We can look at our specific liability and our specific costs. Some of those numbers I showed on the slide.
Yeah. And the benefits for all the employees, irrespective of which plan you're in, which group you're in, is the same, right?
Yes, that is correct.
So it's basically, as the other trustees have talked about, we could fund ours more than the others. And that's the benefit on our side, or however you look at it. So if we're fully funded, let's say we're fully funded and the county is not, or, Superior Court is not. And I don't know, are there some scenarios where it would negatively affect us because we're fully funded and they're not? Or is it, yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure what the drawbacks would be at this point. It would be mostly an impact on our budget. It would be the initial funding, and then there would be a cost savings over the years that I think Trustee Kehoe alluded to, right? And so it's probably more likely a positive cost savings on LACERA's budget over the next 50 years to fund this thing now or earlier than anticipated.
So the benefits, if they change, so if the benefits change, we can't, I mean, let's say we're fully funded, and I think there was a scenario that was brought up. If we're fully funded, then you said, what can we do with the excess? And you could say we could help our people receiving benefits to get more benefits or less contribution. I mean,
well, so that one gets
because we can't do that, right? Because it's the same benefits for everyone, right?
Well, we would have to talk more about that. Potentially offsetting some of the costs maybe that the retirees pay, perhaps. And again, we're getting way beyond the policy. We haven't even talked about policy setting yet, but it's definitely something we could look into. I guess what my thought was, could there be some cost savings for the healthcare program for the retirees who are participating in that program? In other words, could there be supplements? But you have to be careful with that, because that excess funding, like I mentioned earlier, I want to caution that could go away. Our funded ratio could go back down below 100%. So
yeah. So if the county, which is the biggest fish, doesn't project, doesn't have they don't get the full funding, and for whatever reason they do want to cut benefits. I know there's negotiations. They just can't cut benefits. But if they did want to balance out their unfunded ratio, then that would affect everybody, right? If the health benefits were, if the benefits were cut, right?
Right. So we may have to have a discussion with legal about the benefit streams and how that could be structured for LACERA as compared to the county, if the county decides to make changes to their.
So what I'm trying to get at is, if we're fully funded and everybody else is not, we pave the way and we show that this is a good thing, but we could be off in the by ourselves while everybody else there, because they didn't do the prudent thing and invest, and they decide to restructure it somehow, then we could be really overfunded or something, right? That's not necessarily a negative thing, but it's not necessarily a good thing to be way off.
I think maybe what you're concerned about, Trustee Rue, is LACERA employees receive the same benefit package, and it's negotiated by the county for all of us. So as employees, we receive the same benefit package. If the county were to say and it would be prospective, right? For new employees, our new employees, we're no longer going to fund healthcare, or we're going to do something significantly less. And we're only talking about the healthcare benefits at this scenario. That would affect future LACERA employees. And so in that situation, yes, we would suddenly find ourselves significantly overfunded. More than the 100%, because it would, no, not really, because it's, I guess what you project.
Future, so it doesn't affect.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't have future people in the evaluation.
No future people in the evaluation. Okay, so no problem.
Yeah, so that was the point I wanted to make, is that our liability that we're calculating is just looking at the people who have been hired through the valuation date. Any benefit changes would only affect future hires, and so that wouldn't create an overfunding if those benefits change for future employees. It would just change the ongoing accruals cost that we would be calculating.
Okay. No, I appreciate the chair and the board entertaining my hypotheticals. I'm just trying to understand this better. Thank you.
Mr. Green and then Ms. Fessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just for a point of information for myself, and I think Mr. Rice kind of answered it. Talking about our funded ratio and whatnot, and that lockbox, right, for tax purposes. So we add more to that lockbox. Again, I'm trying to understand here, as far as the OPEB portfolio as a whole in the aggregate, right? I know the goal is to increase or decrease our unfunded liability into that lockbox, right, which have to be guaranteed. But what about contributions into the investment portfolio that could be skimmed off the top? I mean, that's what I'm trying to understand, that, we're doing this catch up, right, with doubling in, but it's going into this thing that we can't touch. And technically that lockbox, we can't invest, right? Or am I missing?
Yeah, the OPEB trust is an
You are
investment.
you are
It's
investing it.
Okay.
And it can be used to pay benefits and expenses of the OPEB program.
OPEB program.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it can only be used for that. That's in that sense, it's a lockbox. You can only use it for benefits and expenses of the
Gotcha.
OPEB.
So, yeah, I just, as far as, decreasing that unfunded liability with these additional contributions, what's precluding us from putting it, I mean, I'm just trying to understand why it's not a good idea to add additional, a larger catch up. I mean, I understand the idea of the hybrid and, not wanting to disenfranchise the county but I agree with Mr. Kehoe in a sense that, as its own plan designer for our employees here at LACERA, I would ask the question, would they do it for us? Yeah, that's it. I'm just wanting to understand if that catch-up money was being invested into the portfolio, and why can't we, get to 50%? If we have the ability to do it,
Right. Yeah, and so definitely that catch-up money is being invested into the OPEB trust from the extra money from LACERA. It goes in, and I guess that's why we're here addressing the board today. Over the last couple of years, we did have this situation where we implemented that budget surplus with our budget policy. That was only 3 years ago. And so we did, per Trustee Kehoe's idea, we did start talking to Milliman about pre-funding this. And so, 3 years later, after that extra contribution, we're here talking with the board now. What do we want to do? That's essentially this conversation. So
I guess just, it takes money to make money. So if we're able to decrease our unfunded liability, increase LACERA as the plan sponsor, in that portfolio, wouldn't that also increase decrease our unfunded liability through investment return, because we have more money playing in the pool, and then as a whole, the OPEB would be also stronger, correct?
Yes.
It would lift all boats, so to speak, right? So that's something I guess, I'm chewing on it in my brain, but that makes sense to me.
Yeah, it would help the overall OPEB trust. Keep in mind, LACERA is a little bit smaller of a portion of the OPEB trust than the county, much smaller proportion. So, sure.
Trustee Fezler.
Thank you. I'm also playing catch up, and I'm way behind. I mean, I do know the term OPEB from my prior life, and that's about as much as I came into this conversation with. So I apologize to everybody in the room for asking questions that may seem at a kindergarten level. But I also appreciate Mr. Rice. He pre-answered one of my questions. From what I understand, and it's often the case that when money goes into a trust, it can't come out for just any old reason. So, but in regards to that, I would appreciate some help understanding how this OPEB trust works. Right now, we're putting money into it as one of the various agents. Money's not coming out to pay toward the cost of LACERA's retirees' retired healthcare costs, correct?
Correct. It's a savings account.
Okay, so we're doing the pay-as-you-go, and we're doing this part. And the pay-as-you-go is for somebody like me who's retired and getting benefits.
Correct.
When we have LACERA fully funded, can we then stop the pay-as-you-go part and have the OPEB trust start paying those costs?
Yes, that's the idea.
Okay.
Yes.
And that won't happen until we're fully funded? Is there a point in time before fully funding, like we're at 80% or something like that, where there's a combination of pay as you go and money out of the trust? Or is it a black and white situation?
So short answer, it gets a little bit complicated. We started out partnering with the county when we set up the trust. Our contributions have been generally in lockstep. We've increased them the last couple of years. We were, from LACERA's perspective, we were waiting for the county to reach the ADC. When that gap is closed, Ryan talked about that gap, it's getting very close within the next couple of years. We imagine that the county would say, hey, LACERA, let's start paying county benefits from the OPEB trust. We'll still continue to make our contributions. We're at the ADC now. We'll start doing that. We imagine that LACERA would follow that in lockstep like we have historically.
Okay.
So right now in all of these discussions, we're kind of at this sort of crossroads where LACERA is trying to do a little bit of diversion from the county. So the short answer, I think, is yes, we can, when we get fully funded, pay the benefits from the OPEB trust for LACERA's portion.
Okay, is fully fund, when you say fully funded, is that different than 100%?
I think you were indicating that once you meet the ADC.
Right.
I'm sorry.
So that is much sooner. If
Right.
fully funded is 100% funded ratio,
Exactly.
so that's not going to be for quite
Right.
a while.
Right.
Depending on your funding policy, which is a decision for later this year. But yeah, you could do it as soon as you hit the ADC, which could be just in a few years from now.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that would be like some kind of blend? I mean, we wouldn't be pulling, if you pulled out 100% of the annual costs, you'd start dropping below that ADC, right? So it would be a combination of pay as you go and using some of the money that we've put into the trust. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, it's a combo, but it starts to look more like the pension trust where there's no separate pay-go. All the payments are coming out of the pension trust, all the benefits. And then all the contributions are going in.
Okay,
so
got it.
It would get more simple instead of
I
having
understand.
like these two.
So the money that would
silos,
otherwise be
yeah.
in the pay as you go would just go instead into
Yeah, it
the
would just-
trust.
Right, more like that picture. I remember that picture with the bubbles I showed
Yes,
early on.
yes.
It would look, that picture was a little bit inaccurate because it didn't show the pay-go piece.
There were two bubbles.
Yeah.
Within the one.
We should
Okay.
change that
It
bubble.
was
so-
it was one of those when you have bubbles that stick to
Yeah.
each other,
It
right?
was more like the
Okay.
pension bubbles, and the OPEB will get there.
Right.
It's
Okay.
it's just still doing the separate
Okay,
thing
thank
right
you.
now, for now.
And I have one other very fundamental question. All this money is going into this OPEB trust. We're putting in the Superior Court's putting in a little teeny bit, and the county is putting in some. Is the money within that trust then further separated so that the money we put in isn't available to the other participants?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and are the earnings on everybody's contributions also allocated according to the level of their contribution?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so floating the boat, increasing the float on the boats really isn't going to impact the county. If we put in more money,
You're right.
it won't have any impact on raising the county's level of contribution to the fund, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, they're pooled, but they're pooled for investment purposes. So you all enjoy the same rate of return, but then once the earnings are allocated, they are in separate silos now, and county can't spend money out of your silo, and
Right.
you can't spend money out of theirs.
Okay,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
I guess I look at it from a slightly different
Okay.
perspective. So to Trustee Green's point, if LACERA puts additional money into the OPEB trust gets larger as a whole. Since John and Jude invest that money as a pool, I see that as sort of making the bubble bigger, essentially. So yes, you're putting in more money for LACERA's piece of the OPEB trust, which we allocate and we do all the separate accounting for. But the OPEB trust essentially gets a little bit larger than it would have been if LACERA is adding more money to it, right?
Right, the trust is getting bigger, but that doesn't inure to the benefit of the other agents that are part of that trust, correct?
That
It's
part is-
indirect, so the larger the pool, the more competitive investment fees you might get. for
Okay.
instance, And that would inure to everybody.
Right, okay,
So I think there is an indirect benefit over time.
sure, yeah, there's just a bigger fish.
Just a bigger fish.
Yeah, okay, thank you
Exactly.
very much. Sorry for the time.
Okay, so Milliman has a couple of slides they wanted to walk through in terms of some of the projections we've looked at with them over the last few months.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Ted. Okay. So I realize that we've gone over on time a bit. Looks like you added another 16 minutes. Is that fair, or should I try to go through these pretty quickly?
You ran over a half an hour ago.
Okay. I'll try to go through these really quickly. Then,
It's
just
because
not
you
take too
guys,
much time.
we
Chart
love to have
number 8.
discussions.
Number 8.
You want me to jump to slide number 8?
Yeah. Or, I just want you to.
We
spend a little
could.
I'm
time.
happy to jump to slide
Yeah.
number 8. I think that a lot of the other stuff was covered really well in Ted's
Yeah.
presentation. So
Let's
we
do
can do
that
that.
because it's getting at Trustee Moore's questions from earlier. Yeah. There
Yeah.
we go.
So this is one of the pieces of analysis we did for LACERA, where we were looking at different sort of funding options. There's a lot of lines going on here. I'll try to go through them one at a time. I'm going to start with the dark blue line kind of in the middle of this chart that's in the legends labeled the rolling 30 or the current ADC. That's 30-year reamortization every year type of funding policy that we talked about, that we've been talking about throughout this presentation, that the county is currently using and that's currently written for LACERA. That's where we are currently. And so you can see that that's the contribution levels that would project. And then the next slide shows the funded ratio projection, and it would get to 78% funded at the end of this 50-year projection period. So that's what we've been talking about this whole time of if you reamortize it every year over 30 years, you're not going to get to fully funded. You only get 78% even after 50 years. All of the other lines here, all of the other solid lines here are looking at options where we do a fixed amortization period, where instead of reamortizing over a new 30 or et cetera, or some other number of year period, we are fixing a point in time and saying, so like for the fixed 15 scenario, 15 years from the beginning of this policy, for these projections we looked at starting in 2024, so it would be by 2039, the plan's gonna get fully funded. So right now we would do a 15-year amortization for UAL. 5 years from now, we're doing a 10-year amortization because we're shortening that period to make sure it gets fully funded by the end of that 15-year period. So if we're focusing then still on that yellow line, that fixed 15, you have increased contribution levels over what we're looking at in the other scenarios up until 2039, at which point it's projected to get to 100% funded. Because of this fixed period, it actually gets 100% funded after that 15 years. Once you're at 100% funded, the contributions that you have to make into the fund decrease significantly. And at that point, all your funding is the additional accruals that your current employees are earning, as opposed to having to catch up on all of the benefits that have been earned previously. So that's where after 2039 with that yellow line, the contribution levels are much lower. The light blue line is looking at the same sort of thing, but over a 30-year period. And the green line is looking at that over a 45-year period. When we were doing this analysis, we actually looked at a very wide range. We looked at some scenarios where fully funded in 1 year, others where you go all the way out to a 50-year period. And we've been discussing all of those different options with the county, or not with the county, with LACERA.
Yeah, this next one shows the funded ratios for those same scenarios. So you can see achieving 100% in 15 years, 30 years, or 45 years. Now, one thing to say about these is that they do assume that we always hit our assumptions. So they're nice and smooth lines.
Yeah.
But we all know that they're going to be more squiggly. So anyway, go ahead.
Back to the other chart. What on page number 8?
8. Okay.
Yeah, so when you drop from your pre-funding level, so like take the yellow line,
Mhm.
and you drop from your pre-funding level to your normal cost, then the delta there is the amount of additional funding that will stay in, at least on our side, that will stay in the pension fund and be invested and accrue to the pension side.
Correct.
So
And-
so that's
yeah.
kind of the benefit portion of spending money to pay it off early, but once you pay it off, then that additional funds that you would have been spending if you were continued to amortize over 30 years or 50 years, that money would be invested. So in the long run, it's much more beneficial to pay it off as soon as you can.
If you could jump to slide 11, I think there's some numbers on there that help illustrate that point you're just making. In that this is a numerical version of that same sort of chart we were just looking at, where the contribution levels, if we look at that fixed 15 row, you can see the contribution levels are a little bit higher than the current row, fixed 15 column. If you compare that to the rolling 30, which is the current ADC just to the left of it, you can see that for the first 15 years, contributions are higher, but then starting in 2040, contributions drop significantly. At the very bottom, we sum up the contributions over this 50-year projection period. You can see exactly what you were pointing out, which is that over that 50-year period, funding sooner reduces the total contributions that need to be made. And so in that example, we were projecting $107 million of savings.
Yeah, so that's the real bottom line benefit to you is you save over $100 million by funding early.
So to me, it's a no-brainer.
So if we jump back to what is it, like slide 3 or something like that?
Yeah, I guess, does the group want us to go through all the detail? I mean, we kind of jumped to the punchline.
I wouldn't mind.
You tell us. Okay.
Let's go to slide 4 then. This is where I can give you an update on what we've been discussing with LACERA so far. So we kicked off the study back in September. We've done various different layers of analysis. We've had lots of meetings with LACERA accounting and executive teams, and we've made the following, not firm decisions, but guides of where we think we're going have been made so far. The first question that we came to LACERA with when they asked us to begin this process was, what is the goal? And that was a quick, easy answer of the goal is to get to 100% funded on an actuarial accrued liability basis. That gets back to points you guys were making earlier, and that the reasons for that are that being fully funded, it saves money in the long run. It supports intergenerational equity, where each generation of people are paying for their own benefits instead of paying for the prior generation's benefits. And it provides benefit security so those active employees and retirees know that there is money set aside to fund their benefits. They're not counting on future budgets to have to pay for their benefits. And it's in line with actual best practices for all of those reasons. Second thing that we were looking at with LACERA was how quickly does it make sense to get to that 100% funded? And so that's the kind of slides that we were just looking at in the appendix. And where we've been kind of leaning at the moment is around 15 years. Seems to be like a good balance between budgetary constraints while also getting to 100% funded quickly. I have some numbers in here where comparing that 30-year rolling to the fixed 15, there's 50 million of extra contributions that have to be made in the first 15 years. But then over the following 35 years, it saves 150 million about. So that's the net savings of around 100 million that we were showing you on that later slide. The third step of this and where we're at now is those charts that we looked at in the appendix, where you had that nice pretty graph of the contribution steadily increasing, the funded ratio steadily increasing until it gets 100% funded over a 15-year period. Those only work if all of the actuarial assumptions are met exactly every year, which isn't going to happen. There's going to be investment gains. There's going to be investment losses. There's going to be claims coming in higher than expected, et cetera. When those things occur, they are going to throw off those projections. And so there's two ways that can be handled in broad strokes. One is that, as Ted was talking about earlier, let's say there's investment loss, you can increase contributions to make up the ground that was lost from that investment loss, or you can keep your contributions where you had scheduled them, but now you're not going to get to fully funded at the time that you're expecting to. Or the third option that we're currently in the midst of exploring with LACERA is actuaries have developed quite a few methods at achieving a balance between those two, where you still allow contributions to react to gains and losses as they occur over time, but you do it in a way that doesn't cause unnecessary volatility in those contribution levels, so that you still can achieve some stability to allow for predictability and budget purposes, but are still allowing contributions to at least move some to react to gains and losses that occur. So you're still achieving a good balance between contribution stability and meeting your timeline of getting to fully funded when you want it to.
And that's how the pension fund does it.
Exactly.
It has what we call smoothing methods to try and take those hills and valleys and smooth them out, make them a little more budgetable.
So I got one more comment. So when you come back and do your analysis or presentation on a plan, I want to make sure that we include the available funds based on the percent of assets available for administrative costs and how much we've actually spent against those allocations, I would say, budget allocations over, say, look at 5-year trend or something. So we've had, say, $100 million available each year for the last 5 years, but we've only spent $50 million. So that means you got a $50 million cushion that's available to you if you projected it out and everything was, linear.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we've been looking at as part of this, and we'll continue to look at it that way and include
And
in
then show
presentations.
us all those numbers too.
Yeah, if you want, we can jump to slide 10. where
Slide
we have
10.
an example
Yeah.
of that.
You jump to 10, please.
Sorry, we're jumping around on you in this presentation.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so this slide is showing the contributions that we were projecting. But this time we divided those contributions by the total liability of the pension plan. So this gets directly at that 0.21% of the pension liabilities that are available for LACERA to spend. You can see that currently of that 0.21%, only about 0.0075% is being spent on OPEB contributions. And for example, that 15-year funding scenario doesn't increase it above 0.008%. So it's not resulting in a big increase in contributions relative to that 0.21% budget that's available.
So there's a significant amount of room in there that we could actually plan to spend over the next 3 to 5 years instead of 10 to 15. Mr. Keogh said earlier, why can't we just do it next year?
That is one of the numbers that we looked at. And so that is, I don't know where it actually came in as far as
just
the
full
budget
disclosure.
goes. But
We want to see all the numbers.
okay, we'll keep that in mind.
Mr. Green, Ms. Langdon, and Mr. Oakham.
Again, this is really good stuff. I just, if going back to the thing, if we look at the 10-year CPI inflation, right, whatever, swagging it after adjustment, it's like 10 years ago, $1 got you whatever. Now you need $1.35, right? So the money's worth more today than it will be in 15 years or 20. I know you guys figured that in there. But again, to the point, if we're, instead of revamping everything, one big ad hoc payment, doesn't that make more sense now? Because that money now, whatever it is, getting close to that 100% funding now for investment will be worth more than in 15 years, but again, I know there's the risk with the county, we have to maintain that relationship. I understand all that, but if we have the game to do it, doesn't it just make sense to do it? I mean, I know that's a very broad question, and I know the uncertainty of budget, it's hard to budget.
If I may, I think one of the issues is that, yes, it benefits LACERA if we do that. But if those funds are not needed for LACERA's operations, they benefit the trust, and that benefits all LACERA members. So they're going to be invested one way or another, right? They're going to be invested in the pension plan for the benefit of all members, or it's going to be invested in the OPEB trust for the benefit of LACERA's employees and LACERA's as the employer. So that's why this is not such a no-brainer. Those are not funds that are not being invested now. They are being invested now, and they're being invested now for the benefit of all members. That's, I think, why we thought a 15-year was made more sense, because we're trying to balance what's best for LACERA, what is best for all of the stakeholders.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that. I do understand that. I guess, 15 years,
Not a long time.
what about 5 years? I mean, there's somewhere in
Honestly,
splitting hairs.
any of this is acceptable. As Milliman said, they kind of gave us proposals from 0 to 50 years. It's really a decision of the trustees about how quickly you would want to do this. Those are all acceptable choices. We're just saying these are the trade-offs.
There's downstream impact
Yeah.
too with recruitment and retention. I mean, wouldn't that be great? You come here, you got a retirement, self-funded retirement fund. Come on over for the big win. Come work at LACERA too. So
We hope people hear it that way.
just idea. I mean, looking at 15 years, seven.
Thank you. I apologize if this question was already answered. What is the county's time frame? What are they saying roughly?
So the projections that we were showing in the prior presentation were if the county sticks with their current funding policy, which is that 30-year rolling amortization, with a rolling amortization funding policy like that, there is no timeline at which they're expecting to get fully funded. They're intending to make continued progress to improve the funded ratio, but that progress will slow down over time such that it isn't expected to ever get to fully funded.
Ever? I mean,
there'll be gains and losses that occur, and so
Geologic terms,
they may
maybe.
cause it to bump up. But just from a straight mathematical projection standpoint, assuming no gains and losses, then no, it would never get fully funded.
so if it never got fully funded, when would they use it? I mean, doesn't it have to be fully funded to start? No,
So-
it doesn't have to be fully funded to start drawing.
That's what
Well,
Ted was talking about earlier,
yeah.
where as soon as they meet the ADC, that's kind of when they're planning on turning on that stream of using the trust to pay the benefits and then simplifying the structure where all the contributions just go into the trust and all the benefit payments come out. The idea is that's during those early years, while they're still at like 15-20% funded, the contributions going in should still be exceeding the benefit payments that are coming out in order to improve the funded status. That way you can still be pulling benefits out and still making progress.
So maybe I should have asked, when are they anticipated to meet the ADC?
2028.
20 what?
2028.
So that's very soon. So
Yeah.
they would start drawing at that point, and that's why they would maybe never be fully funded, or?
No, it goes back to the 30-year rolling amortization.
Mhm.
Until they change that to something shorter without the rolling feature, they'll always be like a frog jumping partway to the pond and never actually getting to the pond.
But they would still be using it, and it would still
Yes.
relieve the regular pension fund from being cut into. Isn't that where do the benefits money come from now?
So currently,
County budget.
the county budget, PAYGO, we bill the county every month and they
Oh,
send us.
pay-go like that, not pay-go to our pension.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That helps a lot. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just very quickly, and this might be a silly question. We've only talked about pre-funding. We haven't talked about investing those dollars to see if we can make that 107.50 million. So I'm not sure what your clients are doing, but what's your reaction? Or is that a dangerous thing where you're gambling a little bit on returns? But we've been making some pretty good returons.
Yeah. We're not the investment consultant, so we
I
can't
understand.
tell you where to invest. All we can say is
We
that
aren't
it's a
asking
good
you-
idea to invest. And what you're doing is similar to what a lot of our other clients are doing by putting the majority of it in equities but having some bonds as well to kind of diversify.
We're doing a good job there. I'm just wondering if Milliman would say, hey, maybe taking a portion of that, invest it, and you can come down faster. Okay, that's
Yeah, we
the
can't
thing.
give you investment advice.
Well, I do want to emphasize that the money that is being pre-funded is being invested currently.
Yes, it is.
It's not just being
I
held
think he
onto in
knows that.
cash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're aware of that. It's
Okay.
being invested, of course.
All right.
But yeah, how you invest it is up to you.
Well,
you
no, we
at the
understand
end of the
that.
day.
We've got a good investment guy. The other thing I would say is that, and I never thought about this, and I've been around for about, 12 years. The better we do with our projections on what we spend at LACERA leaves us more money to put into that fund. So I think we've got to take a strong look, all the money we spend on lawyers. I'm talking outside lawyers. That hurts LACERA. So I think we got to figure that. I think we got to tell people that too, maybe downtown, that we can do this a better job for them if we don't have issues that come up. So I'm just saying, let's tighten up, because that when we tighten up, we have more money to pre-fund. So it seems to me that's a good thought, and I've never thought about that before.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I wanted to just mention this comment when Laura was talking, but I'm being respectful. We were scalded at the beginning of the meeting, so I'm being respectful of properly raising our hands. So I totally agree that when we're switching the investment side to the LACERA side, we're helping LACERA, but impacting the investment. But in the reality, we're talking about very small numbers. So I think as we analyze this, we need to see what the overall impact would be to our funding status. So if by fully funding the OPEB for LACERA has a 0.0001% impact to our funding status, then it is a no-brainer. But if it has a 5%, then we stay far away from it, right? So those are the things. So I think as we analyze this, we have to look at the greater impact. So I ask for that as we look at the numbers. Thank you.
That actually is one of the things we looked at as well. I don't have a slide for it in the appendix to point to this time, but we did look at it, and I don't remember the exact amount, but it was something like less than 0.5% of the pension funded status, is that it would go from over. I think we can look like a 15-year projection. Instead of being 99.3%, it was going to be a little bit below that.
Yeah, so as we go to the fully funding potential, it'd be nice to see. I think that number is going to be pretty de minimis, but it would be important to see.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so Milliman, did you have any other slides you wanted to highlight, or are we about wrapping it up?
I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from the trustees?
Any other questions?
Comments?
Great presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to move right along with the rest of this. The rest of the reports, they're all just read and absorb. So items B, C, D, E, and F, we're going to move past that. Items for staff review. We don't have any items for future agendas. If we don't have any, we're now ready for good of the order.
Mr. Green.
It's a beautiful day. Glad to be here. Good to see everybody, and thanks.
Mr. Razzo.
Yes, thank you for that report. It kind of puts, I'm thinking of my own personal situation where I'm handling my equity of my house, and should I use that money for investment? So I'm like,
no,
because I have a very low interest rate, 2%. So I'm like, I can use that money anyway. So a lot of things to think about in comparison. And thank you so much for that. And it is a great day. We're going to have some great weather. So thank you.
Mr. Harris.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the great presentation. Just remember, when you're having these conversations at a restaurant in Idaho, you're probably surrounded by LACERA members that are listening to you. So be careful what you say. But yeah, thank you for a great presentation, and just glad to be back. USA.
Ms. Vesler.
I also am very grateful for the presentation and for everyone's patience in me trying to catch up. I've got a lot to learn, and every time I'm here, I realize that well that I have to dig into is deeper. But I'm very grateful for everyone's patience and all the guidance I'm receiving. And just one more thing, go Dodgers.
Yeah.
Mr. Keo?
Thank you. Yep, there's going to be a big rush for the Otani bobblehead today. So we actually have our emergency operations center open to support LAPD and LA Metro today because of that. So, but good job by everybody. The presentation and actually the entire meeting. It's just been outstanding. We've ran just completely smooth, and I appreciate that. Shout out to the executive team and all the staff.
Mr. Root?
Thank you to the staff and to the board members for another great meeting, and congratulations on your retirement, since that's what we do here. Hopefully your benefits are as good as our retirees. and I'm glad that it's one of the rare times where we don't have to say something sad about something bad going on in this world or locally. Thank you.
Mr. Moore?
Thanks for this presentation. I really enjoyed it because in my prior life, I worked to implement GASB 45 and 75 at SCAG, and it was exciting times. And so I hope we come out of this looking real well. Thanks.
Ms. Langton?
In my former life, I studied the rule against perpetuities, which was much more easy to understand than this, but thank you very much for the great explanation. Just wishing well our CEO, and huge thank you to our Deputy CEO, Luis Lugo, who is so patient and so knowledgeable and so supportive. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you.
Ms. Ginsburg?
Great presentation and congratulations on your retirement. Thank you for supporting us all these years.
Mr. Oakham?
Anybody have any tickets for April 15th? They're giving Jackie Robinson jerseys. That's exciting. That's exciting. And he, as you know, he was born here in Pasadena and lived right down the street. Great presentation. After 12 years, I finally understand it.
Great. Luis Lugo?
Yeah, well, welcome to the club. So have I. And Janet, if I had a torpedo bat, it would be a good retirement gift. But no, just a couple of things. As I said in the CEO report, we did want to acknowledge a few retirements. We not acknowledged 2 retirements last month, and we have three retirements this month at LACERA that I think equates to over 60 years of on-the-job experience. So I want to invite Kathy and Ricky to just a few comments to our retirees at LACERA. So Kathy and Ricky, through the chair.
Good morning. So I want to acknowledge the retirement of Glenn Musson. He has worked in the systems division at LACERA for 27 years, and 24 of those years he's had the same supervisor, Eddie Paz, who is still working. And just to tell you a little bit about him, he's fluent in 5 languages: English, C++, Visual Basic, Java, and C#. And the technologies that he worked on is enterprise content management, so workflow and document imaging. He has spent a lot of time with administrative services and DPC, and most recently he helped us do some OCR projects. So he will be sorely missed, and we wish him well. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge 2 of our staff who retired and who are already missed. Their last day was Thursday. So I'm going to talk about them together because they actually chose to retire together. This is how committed they were to LACERA and each other as a team. But Deanna Hernandez, who had 23 years of service and was a document processing specialist, who actually started as a document processing, she's a document processing coordinator and was previous in document processing assistant, and Regina Harris, who's 38 years and actually started her career in the Hall of Administration. So think about all of the changes that she saw in her career with LACERA. They have both dedicated their life. And so when I talked to the team a little bit about what would you like me to share about the team as they walked out the door, number one, their dedication. This is consistent for both of them. their desire to mentor. They were walking encyclopedias. They were teachers, they were patient, they were kind. And the thing that I remember most when I first met Regina, and it's the same as the day she walked out the door, was her smile. She said, I'm here to serve our members. We do it for our members. And so in DPC, a lot of times you have what I call my unsung heroes, because you cannot get any work done without DPC. The documents that they ingest into the system, they're scanning, they're reviewing, they're indexing, whether it's a birth certificate, change of address, direct deposit, whatever it is that they're doing, they do it with excellence. And so both Deanna and Regina are already missed, and we just want to thank them for their service and really appreciate the fact that they now get to call and harass us when they need help. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I wanted to ask the board if we can adjourn today in memory of a longtime friend of mine, Carmen O. Perez. Carmen passed away 13 days ago. She was the aide to Supervisor Kenny Hahn. She was a babysitter to County Supervisor Janice Hahn. Very close personal friends with County Supervisor Don Kanabe, and retired from the county workforce as a director of Rancho Los Amigos Hospital. So Carmen O. Perez. We are going to take how about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back in closed session and deal with the disability cases.
Recording stopped.